If the world is priced in sats, which is Bitcoin, then nothing else really matters because everything is using this system of measurement. So I guess the real measurement of Bitcoin that I would look at is adoption, like how many people are using Bitcoin, spending Bitcoin, and transacting it in economies around the world. And that's the difficult thing to measure because if Bitcoin functions as money, you should not have visibility directly. So it's sort of like a measurement that cannot be directly gauged, right? On-chain data is flawed because it only measures a certain dimension. And with Bitcoin layer 2s like Liquid and Lightning, a lot of that no longer is factored in, and Lightning has that privacy dimension to it, as does Liquid with confidential transactions. So it's almost like if Bitcoin succeeds, you're not going to be able to measure it empirically, but you're going to know because no one will accept anything but Bitcoin.
Samson Mow is changing our perspective on Bitcoin's future in addition to forecasting its ascent. Samson contends that the expansion of Bitcoin is more akin to a phase transition, a total transformation similar to ice melting into water, while many experts concentrate on declining returns with each Bitcoin cycle. The conventional rules no longer apply in this transition from a fiat-based system to a Bitcoin standard. According to Mow, there is no reason to anticipate diminishing returns if Bitcoin finally replaces fiat currencies. Just as the transition from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles wasn't gauged by small victories, but rather by a complete paradigm change. He envisions hyperbitcoinization, in which Bitcoin takes the place of fiat-based prices as the universal unit of account. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and enable post notifications if you have a strong interest in learning about the future of finance and the function of digital assets like Bitcoin. This will ensure that you never miss anything. Thank you, and enjoy the video.
I don't really believe that there are diminishing returns for Bitcoin, simply because Bitcoin is a replacement for fiat money. So it's better to think of Bitcoin's growth as a phase transition from one state to another, from solid to liquid or liquid to gas. And it's just a replacement of a current system. So if Bitcoin does replace fiat, then why would there be diminishing returns? You don't really frame automobile adoption from the horse and buggy as diminishing returns. It is a phase change. We just went to automobiles and we stopped using horse and buggy except for recreational reasons, right? Like for fun. So if Bitcoin, it does do what I think it will do, then you kind of just replace everything and everything is on a Bitcoin standard. So my theory is that maybe some Bitcoiners won't like this answer, but I think gold will run up because the trading pair of the future is not BTC USD, but BTC XAU. Because at the very least, gold is a relatively finite asset that you can't manufacture out of thin air. The exact verifiable quantities, it's kind of TBD, but at least it's better than everything else. So I think if there is trading of Bitcoin, it's going to be against the ounces of gold rather than against dollars or yen or pesos. So with that in mind, you could expect gold would probably have a run. And maybe with the push for things like auditing Fort Knox, we actually have a better visibility on who has gold and we kind of level up a bit. I think Tether and their product Tether Gold is probably a step in the right direction. They are far more stringent on how they're managing and tokenizing bars of gold than what is currently used to trade and value gold on traditional markets. Gold has a large place in society, and it does have history. So I don't think it'll disappear overnight like everything else. I think it'll hang on to the financialization aspects for some time. But I think Bitcoin will also demonetize gold when we hit probably 500,000, because at that point we're roughly half of gold's market cap. And more modern thinkers or in investments and funds and institutions will likely start to reassess and reevaluate their gold holdings relative to Bitcoin holdings. So it's likely that we will demonetize some of gold's market cap. But gold, I think, will still hold out better than everything else. So I think it should revalue itself a bit more. Well, price is only a metric until hyperbitcoinization. And at that point, there is no price of Bitcoin. It's just sat. So People like to joke at Bitcoiners saying 1 BTC equals 1 BTC, but there is some profound truth to that, because that's really all that matters. That if the world is priced in sats, which is Bitcoin, then nothing else really matters, because everything is using this system of measurement. So I guess the real measurement of Bitcoin that I would look at is adoption, like how many people are using Bitcoin, spending Bitcoin, and transacting it in economies around the world. And that's the difficult thing to measure, because if Bitcoin functions as money, you should not have visibility directly. So it's sort of like a measurement that cannot be directly gauged, right? On-chain data is flawed because it only measures a certain dimension. And with Bitcoin layer 2s like Liquid and Lightning, a lot of that no longer is factored in. And Lightning has that privacy dimension to it, as does Liquid with confidential transactions. So it's almost like if Bitcoin succeeds, you're not going to be able to measure it empirically, but you're going to know, because no one will accept anything but Bitcoin.
Although Samson Mow admits that a lot of governments are testing central bank digital currencies, he doesn't think they will be widely used. He thinks many governments are only pursuing CBDCs to look technologically advanced, rather than as part of a real long-term strategy, even though some see them as a tool for financial management. The similar argument may be made for the proposed BRICS currency, which could not be a true financial revolution but more political rhetoric. Samson concludes by stating that since value is decided by the people, not by governmental order, governments will be forced to accept Bitcoin. As citizens adopt Bitcoin, governments will be forced to follow suit. To remain up to date on the most recent developments in Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and the digital economy, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and enable post notifications.
Are you a believer that hash rate precedes price? And if so, can you maybe explain the logic and why that would be the case?
Well, you could say that hash rate precedes price, and it is the case right now, but I don't think it is an indicator in the long run. Hash rate to me seems to more measure nation-state adoption for mining, because while countries don't necessarily declare it publicly, they are mining. And that was the case for Bhutan. We didn't know until they kind of got caught, because they were involved in the Celsius case, I believe. So they can mine. And the reason why hash rate seems to be on a tear, in my view, is that it's countries mining that are price insensitive. They don't really care about the price of electricity, because they're behind the meter. The energy is their own, and either it's curtailed and run off, or they can just say, we'll use Bitcoin to mine, and it belongs to the state. So it doesn't matter really if the price drops or if the price goes up, because they will mine regardless. And I think this will continue to be the trend in the future, because energy production and Bitcoin mining are two sides of the same coin, because you need to be able to utilize energy. You have a lot of excess energy, and you have to get rid of it somehow in certain situations. So energy companies will just become Bitcoin miners. And as we build more energy production facilities, then hash rate should logically keep following that growth trajectory. But there's also a danger, I think, to saying that hash rate and price are linked, because one day, maybe 50 years in the future, hash rate could taper off or drop off, simply because it's not as economically viable to bring on miners to mine at that point, when the subsidy is a lot lower, or fees drop, or various reasons. But that does not mean that the Bitcoin network is less secure, because it's almost as if we have an oversupply of hash rate, and the natural equilibrium could be a lot lower, and you can still have the same level of security too. So I think if you just say hash rate has to always keep going up, then you're opening the door for some future FUD attacks, where the media saying Bitcoin death spiral because of mining death spiral. But we can actually make do with a lot less hash rate. It just means maybe you make smaller transactions per transaction. You're not transacting 10, 20,000 coins, but you break that up into 10 transactions of 1,000, and you wait for more confirmations. But the Bitcoin network is very resilient in that regard. I don't really see the point of a new currency, and you can kind of compare it to, like, let's say a failing state relaunching their currency. Will the citizens accept that reboot when there is an alternative like Bitcoin, or even stablecoins for that matter? I think the answer is no, because the reason countries can get away with reboots in the past is because there is no alternative. But with the dawn of Bitcoin, you can opt out. So I think it's hard to launch something like a BRICS currency in this day and age, where the political aspect of it is also something that cannot be ignored. But that's even more precarious right now. Like, the trust that is needed to establish something like a BRICS currency is not something you can project out 10, 20 years. Are those alliances and relationships still going to exist? I think it's a big question mark. So the future of the BRICS currency is definitely an even bigger question mark. That is, if they can get it off the ground. But maybe it's just a nothing burger. Like, a lot of countries like to say they are working on a CBDC, and it's not necessarily that they want to enslave the population or control everything. Definitely a possibility and something we should be cognizant of. But they can also just be saying we're doing something to say they're doing something to look like they're on the cutting edge and relevant and, high tech. And maybe it's the same with the BRICS currency. It's just we're doing something, and that's something they know will not work either. But ultimately, all these countries are going to use Bitcoin because their people are going to use Bitcoin, and governments usually end up using what the people deem valuable. They can't mandate value. I mean, that's what fiat is, and fiat has been failing for the last 100 years, a couple hundred years.
Samson Mow highlights that although numerous governments are experimenting with the proposed BRICS currency and central bank digital currencies, these efforts might be more about political posturing than substantive reform. He contends that although governments may assert that they are making technological advancements, these initiatives are frequently really token ones. In actuality, Mow thinks that these centralized systems have a significant problem because Bitcoin gives users an option. Citizens now have the choice to opt out and select Bitcoin or even stablecoins, in contrast to previous attempts to reset failing currencies. As a result, new government-backed currencies are less effective since consumers will choose to use those that have real value. Samson also questions the notion that the hash rate of Bitcoin, which is a gauge of the network's processing capacity, can accurately forecast future price changes. Instead, he contends that nation-states are increasingly mining Bitcoin secretly, which is driving up hash rates, particularly in nations where state control renders energy costs irrelevant. These governments mine Bitcoin in order to improve their financial standing and commercialize excess energy. He contends that as energy production and Bitcoin mining grow interwoven and mutually reinforcing, this trend will continue. Last but not least, Samson is certain that governments will eventually embrace Bitcoin, not because they choose to, but because they will have no choice but to follow their constituents' example. When people realize that Bitcoin is more valuable than fiat money, governments will be forced to accept it. Governments cannot control what people consider valuable, and Bitcoin is winning that fight. Samson says this change is unavoidable. And as always, happy investing.